everyone, my name is Sara Harberson and I am America's College Counselor. I'm going to give you all a chance to log on. I just want to make sure everything looks good. Let me know if you are out there. Let me know if you are a parent or a student, what grade you or your child is in. Let me know what questions are on your mind. I haven't done a Facebook Live in a while, so I know you're going to have a lot of questions for me, and this is such an important time, especially for those high school seniors, right? So we've got some early action deadlines coming up. Like the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Their deadline for early action is October 15th, so that's coming up. But a lot of early action and early decision deadlines are going to be around November 1st to about November 15th. So this is a really busy time for those high school seniors, but we've got juniors and sophomores and freshmen that have a lot of questions. So I want to make sure that I give you all a chance to ask those questions. I haven't done one of these, I think, in maybe June. So I'm excited to be back. It's just been a really, really busy summer with Application Nation, class of 2024, keeping me very busy, and also our younger group, Application Nation, which is for families in the class of 2025, 2026, and 2027. And I should mention, we've got a big surprise coming this weekend for the younger Application Nation group, so stay tuned. But I'd like to do this just like I've done with Instagram Live. I switch. I'm usually at my desk right over there, but I thought to make it a little bit more informal so that you feel like you've got someone on your side. So that's why I switch positions, and let me know what you think of this vantage point. I've got my fireplace going because, of course, I'm freezing and it's only October 2nd here. So let's see what questions you have. Hi, I'm seeing a lot of our Application Nation families here. Thank you for joining. Yeah, Will, I did see your email come through, but I was so busy. I didn't have any time to get back to you, but it looks like you're logged on. All right, let's see what questions. You've got a 12th grader, Denise. Good. All right, here's the first question. What tips do you have for a current senior applying to Johns Hopkins early decision? Okay, so a couple things. So let's just describe what early decision is in case we have families who are new to the process. Early decision is a program that students can apply to at some colleges if it's offered. The deadline is usually around November 1st to November 15th. I think Johns Hopkins deadline for early decision is November 1st. And when the student says that is their top choice and they apply early decision, it really can give them an edge in the admissions process. So you will find out that for a college that has early decision, their acceptance rate is going to be higher in early decision compared to regular decision, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times higher in early decision compared to regular decision. So it really does give a competitive student an advantage in the admissions process. It's funny, I just edited a supplement for Johns Hopkins, and I believe they're still doing one supplemental essay. So some tips for if you're applying to Johns Hopkins early decision. It is a highly selective college, so you want to make sure that you are taking the most challenging classes for all 4 years of high school in all 5 core academic subjects: math, science, English, foreign language, and history. Generally speaking, if you're going to be reporting scores, they should be on the higher end. I would say that if you're reporting test scores, you would probably want your SAT scores to be a 1500 or higher, or if you've taken the ACT, around a 34 or higher, but obviously higher scores than that can make you even more competitive for Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins is going to also be looking at letters of recommendation from your counselor and academic core teachers, and just like all the colleges that use the common application, they're also going to be looking at activities, honors, the main essay, and again, I believe there is a supplemental essay. Oh, thanks, Jen. Jen was mentioning that Clemson has an early action deadline of October 15th as well. Yeah, some of those big Southern public universities, you will find their early action deadline is a little bit sooner. I want to say University of Georgia is October 15th as well. Is early action admissions rates better than regular admissions? Okay, so let's say a college doesn't have early decision. They have early action and regular decision. Let's use the example of Georgetown University. So they have what's called a restrictive early action program, so a little bit more complicated than just your traditional early action program, and they have regular. And they, what I appreciate about Georgetown is they are very transparent about their acceptance rates between early action and regular decision, and that's pretty unusual for a private, highly selective college. What Georgetown will say to the public, and they're very clear about it, is there's no statistical advantage. There's no clear advantage if you apply early action to Georgetown versus regular. And that's pretty much the same consistent message if a college is going to share that information. Generally speaking, if the college has an early action program and regular decision, you're not going to see any advantage of whether you apply early action or regular. So very different than early decision, which is going to give those students who apply early decision a distinct advantage in the admissions process. Hi, Karen. All right, next question. Hi, Sarah. I'm a parent of a senior. How important is an 800 on one side of the SAT if your other side is in the 85th percentile? Do you submit your score or go test optional? This is such a tricky question. So how do you know how competitive your test scores are, and how do you know if you should report them for a test optional college? So what I recommend that students do is they've got to have their whole testing record in front of them. They can't kind of make this decision, early in junior year. It's kind of a decision that you make right before you submit your application in the fall of senior year usually. You want to try to get your hands on the college's middle 50% range for SAT scores or ACT scores from the most recent admissions cycle. So if you have a high school senior right now, the most recent admissions cycle was for the students who just graduated from high school in 2023 who would graduate from college in 2027. So look on the college's website, look to see if they have a current freshman profile. That is going to ideally provide those middle 50% ranges. Some families will hear me talk about the Common Data Set. Common Data Set is a great resource for families, but you have to remember it's usually a year or 2 years behind, so it's not as up to date. And if you see SAT and ACT scores on a college's Common Data Set, you want to keep in mind that those are for the enrolled student body, not for the admitted students. And you want to compare your scores to the admitted students. It's usually a higher average for admitted students compared to the students who actually enroll. If you're looking at your SAT score and let's say you have an 800 in math and you have, let's say you have a 600 on the evidence-based reading and writing. Let's say that your combined score fits within the middle 50% range. That's a good sign, but I also recommend that students look at the breakdown between the math middle 50% range and the evidence-based reading and writing score, and you can do this for the ACT as well. So admissions officers are going to be looking at your combined SAT score or your composite score for the ACT, but the more selective colleges are going to drill down and they're going to look at the individual sections. So in an ideal world, both of your sections of the SAT are going to fall within that middle 50% range. That's going to put you in the best light, and that's probably the safest. But let's say you're applying to the engineering school and you got that 800 in math. That's going to be a much stronger score for engineering, and so the college might not be as concerned with that lower evidence-based reading and writing. So ideally look at that middle 50% range for admitted students. You can usually hopefully find that information on a college's admissions website, not on the common data set, and then look at your combined or composite score on the SAT or ACT, and try to also look at the breakdowns of sections as well and how your scores compare. What is the difference in early decision and early action? Yeah, so the deadlines are usually pretty similar, and there are going to be some colleges that have early decision 1, early decision 2, early action, and regular decision. So Tulane University is an example of that. So some colleges actually have both early decision and early action. Deadlines are usually pretty similar, but again, early decision is for that student that's saying, this is my top choice, because if the student is admitted in early decision, it's a binding decision. It means that that college will expect that that student will enroll as a freshman. Early action, again, same deadlines. You might hear around the same time as an early decision program, or you could hear back sometime in January after those regular decision deadlines have passed. So you want to be aware not only of the deadline of when you're supposed to submit the application, but also when the college actually notifies you. Again, with early action, you're not going to get that advantage that a student would get in early decision. Some colleges have early action and regular, some colleges have early decision and regular, and some colleges like Tulane have early decision, in fact, 2 rounds of early decision, early action, and regular decision. And if a college has all 3 of those programs like Tulane, you want to absolutely always know that the acceptance rate for early decision is usually going to be 2, 3, 4 times as high potentially as that college's early action and regular decision acceptance rate. What do highly selective colleges think about an off-campus study hall for senior year? So a couple things about study hall. I wrote a blog about this a couple of years ago, and if you're new to me, I literally have a blog about every possible admissions issue. So I did write a blog about study halls. It's really interesting, and I don't think, as parents, we are, so intuitive, but when we think of a study hall, sometimes we think of it as something negative, but it's not viewed negatively at all in the admissions process, as long as the student is taking all 5 core classes for all 4 years of high school. If you've got your core academic classes covered, admissions officers don't care if you have a study hall, and I actually recommend it. I think students are absolutely taking more academic core classes than they need to. They're skipping lunch, they're not taking a study hall, they have so many activities after school, they're not able to get their work done until really late at night or in the wee hours of the morning. So I'm a big fan of study halls. Admissions officers are fine with it as long as you've got your core academic classes covered. And almost always, they actually will never know that you have a study hall. It doesn't show up on your transcript because you don't get credit or a grade for study hall, and you don't have to report it in your senior year courses on your application. So most of the time, the admissions officers would never know. Now, an off-campus study hall, I'm not sure what that is, but if it works just like, an in-school study hall, I think you should be okay. Karen's just saying, I just hopped over from the AN 2024 UC Zoom call. Thank you so much, Karen. Yes, so all of our Application Nation class of 2024 families, a lot of them joined us from 8 to 9 p.m. East Coast time. We went through the University of California application. So yes, thank you for joining us here too. Oh, I know. Thank you, Yael. Yeah. I have to say, when we were doing our Zoom call just a bit ago, my air conditioning turned on, so I'm so grateful to be a little bit closer to the fireplace right now. What's your advice on submitting test scores at this time? Yeah, it's really tricky. And I should mention, I think most of you know this, I'm a mom of 3 kids, and I've been in the industry for almost 25 years, so about 24 and a half at this point. My oldest child is a high school senior, so everything that you're experiencing, I'm experiencing in real time as a mom as well. And this whole test optional landscape is really complicated, right? So let's take a little bit of a history lesson. well before the pandemic hit, there were hundreds of colleges and universities that were test optional. Small liberal arts colleges like Bowdoin College to, large private selective institutions like the University of Chicago and everything in between. And students had a lot of good options if they did not want to report their test scores in the admissions process. But once the pandemic hit, we all know that almost every single college in the United States went test optional, at least for a period of time. There were a few exceptions, but they weren't many. The University of Florida never went test optional. Florida State never went test optional. There aren't many though. Now that things are beginning to settle down with the pandemic, I would say a handful of those colleges that went test optional have decided to again require testing. So this is the case with a school like MIT, for example. They were test optional just for I think a 2-year period or maybe 3-year period of time, but now they're requiring the SAT or ACT. But the vast majority of colleges in this country are still test optional. And I say it's complicated because, I'm seeing the data come in from our Application Nation students. You have to remember in each Application Nation group, we have almost every single state represented in the group and some countries as well. So 40, 48, 49 states in each Application Nation group. So we really see a cross section of the country. And we've got students applying to highly selected colleges, to colleges with very generous acceptance rates and everything in between. What I'm seeing is for our Application Nation students who are applying to highly selective colleges, even if the highly selective college is test optional, I am seeing that students have much better odds of getting admitted when they are reporting scores and reporting high scores at that. And it is particularly obvious with the colleges that went test optional because of the pandemic. And so those colleges were really forced to adopt that test optional policy without doing the research, without really embracing what test optional is supposed to be, without knowing how strong students who don't report scores do when they get to college. And so I'm seeing a real advantage, a clear advantage when students are applying to highly selective colleges with strong test scores. The students who are not reporting scores, some of them are still getting admitted, but not at the same rate. At those colleges that have slightly more generous acceptance rates or more generous acceptance rates, kind of those colleges that have acceptance rates of 26% and higher, applying without scores doesn't seem to make as much of a difference here or there. Students are still getting in at about the same rate as if you reported scores or didn't report scores. But with the highly selected colleges, I think there's clear evidence to suggest that if you've got high test scores, they can help you in this environment. What's the maximum number of times that you recommend taking the SAT, and why that number? What's the disadvantage of taking the SAT more times than you can recommend? Okay, so for the last 24 years that I've been in the field, admissions folks will have always said, I would try to take the SAT at the most 3 times, or if you're taking the ACT the most 3 times. And that was the rule of thumb for a very long time. And I think it continues to I know it continues to be the rule even in 2023. The difference though is that most colleges are not requiring students to report all of their test scores. So when you're filling out the common application, you only report the scores that you want to report from your highest testing dates, even if it happens on different dates. So with a few exceptions, like a Georgetown University that requires all of your SAT scores, all of your ACT scores, most colleges aren't going to see your full testing history or your full testing record. That being said, I think the students who are serially taking the SAT and ACT, it really takes away from their ability to do well in their classes. It can add a whole extra layer of stress. So I still believe in taking the test 3 times at the most, and I would really spread it out as much as possible. I do see the best results when the student starts taking the SAT or ACT junior year. It is very unusual for a student to do well on the SAT or ACT before that. And I would just spread it out between junior and senior year. So maybe take the test twice in junior year, or maybe once in junior year, once over the summer, and then maybe once again in the fall of senior year. That is what I recommend. That's when I see the best results. Is there anywhere to find the engineering admissions statistics? And I assume you're asking about a specific college or university that has an engineering school. Usually you're not going to find a college or university break down and give to the public admissions data on all the individual undergraduate schools, majors, and programs at the institution. It's highly unusual. If they give you any information, it's usually an overall acceptance rate, overall GPA, average SAT or ACT scores for the entire admitted pool for that college or university. There are a few exceptions. I can think of the University of Massachusetts Amherst has always done a really great job and been really transparent about the admissions data for each undergraduate program there at UMass Amherst. But other than that, it's really difficult to get your hands on that information. But generally speaking, if you're applying to an engineering school, you often, at a big university, will often, if we had that information available, you would see that average SAT and ACT scores tend to be a little bit higher than the overall average for the college or university, and that's because engineering students tend to test well on standardized tests. They tend to be much stronger in math and science, so if you're applying to an engineering school, having the most advanced calculus by senior year and the most advanced physics, plus all the other science classes, is going to make you a more competitive applicant. When do early action decisions usually come out? Yeah, I referenced this earlier. It's not consistent among all colleges and universities. So it's tough because for most of the colleges that offer early action at this point, they are not releasing their early action results until sometime in January. And as I mentioned, by that point, regular decision deadlines have already passed, so it's really difficult for a student to pivot that late in the process. Let's say they don't get into their early action school, they then have to rely on the regular decision applications that they've submitted right before finding out. There are going to be a few exceptions. I'm thinking of the University of Georgia usually releases decisions on the earlier end, and any of those highly selective colleges that have a restrictive early action or a single choice early action program, they tend to release those decisions around mid-December. But more and more colleges are offering early action, and more colleges are releasing those decisions in January. And why is that? Okay, the reason why a lot of colleges have early action is it increases their applicant pool, because students are very interested in those early action programs because they're non-binding and they can find out early. They're not finding out as early as they want, but they can find out earlier in senior year. So that's one thing. The other reason why they are releasing decisions later in January, again, past those regular decision deadlines, is because their early action pools tend to be huge and it gives them a little extra time to go through those applications, but also they're hoping that by releasing their early action results after regular decision, it gives some students who've already been admitted to an early decision school or maybe a restrictive early action school to withdraw their application so that they're not going to be considered in their early action pool, because that college doesn't want to waste an acceptance on a student who's going to be going somewhere else. They're going to lose that student in terms of yield as well. And so by Waiting a little bit longer in January, sometimes mid to late January, it gives those students that already have heard from another school that they've been admitted, a school that they want to go to, it gives them a chance to withdraw their early action application from that other institution. Do you recommend attaching a resume when it says optional for selective colleges? 99% of the time, no, but there are some exceptions, right? So I often will say Florida State University and the University of Texas, Austin, both of those institutions seem to really like the resume. Other than that, it would be rare for a college to require a resume or to really spend time looking at that resume. Almost always they are saying that they will accept a resume, but they truly don't have the time to review it. Admissions officers would much rather look at a student's activities and honors right on the application because it's a template that they are used to and they're able to get through the application much faster. My daughter is a junior. Should she take the SAT in November or wait for March for the digital version? Great question, right? So a lot of you know that the College Board is unveiling a digital version of the SAT, and if you are in the US, the first digital SAT will be available in March. So over the last 24 years of my career, I think the College Board has changed the SAT. I want to say I can think of 3 different times, and whenever a change was coming and it was this impending change, families, I think there were more families that wanted to try to get the old test done before it changed. And I understand that, but I also think we have to be careful to make sure that the student isn't taking the SAT, for example, too soon. So what I would recommend is if the student has already done extensive test prep over the summer and the fall of junior year, and they are taking practice SATs and they're doing really well on it, yeah, absolutely. Give it a try. Try to take the current SAT before it changes, but I think most juniors aren't really ready until March of junior year for the first time. Does Stony Brook University ACE program count as dual enrollment to add to the education section? So I'm not quite sure about this particular program, but a lot of the public high schools across the country have an agreement with a community college or a local university. And those dual enrollment classes, sometimes they're usually taught at the high school, but sometimes not. But basically the student takes a dual enrollment class because it gives them credit to graduate from high school, but it also can work towards a college degree. What you will find is that if you are staying in state and attending a state or a public university in your home state and you took a bunch of these dual enrollment classes, a lot of times you're going to be able to get credit and those courses will count towards your college degree. But if you're looking at highly selective colleges, they would much prefer AP classes. And if you're looking to attend college outside of your home state, a lot of times those dual enrollment classes are not going to count towards your college degree. So just be aware of that. Okay, and in terms of where you indicate that information, yes, it's going to be in the education section of the Common App. And so in the education section, you will have to indicate if you have taken classes at another high school, like let's say there was a scheduling conflict and you weren't able to take Spanish for at your high school, so you took it online through an online accredited high school. Let's say you took a college class in the summer because you were interested in it. Let's say you're taking dual enrollment classes through your high school and the local university. There will be a question in the education section of Common App asking to select whether they were dual enrollment classes, whether they were college classes, and then you list the institution. So if it's a dual enrollment situation, you would be listing, I assume, Stony Brook University. But if your dual enrollment classes appear on your home high school's transcript, that's all you need to do. If they don't appear on your home high school's transcript, you will have to do one of two things. You'll have to ask that dual enrollment institution to send an official transcript to the colleges that you're applying to, or if self-reported information is okay, in the additional information section, you can list the dual enrollment classes or college classes that you've taken and the grades that you've gotten, because the education section does not give you that space to do that. University of Chicago or Claremont McKenna, my student is being recruited by both for cross country and wants to study econ, but not 100% sure. Oh my gosh, these two schools are amazing. Okay, they're both highly selective colleges. Interestingly, even though University of Chicago is a university and Claremont McKenna is a small liberal arts college, they're both Division III sports. What do I mean by that? If you are getting recruited for a Division III sport education, your education is going to take precedence over your sport. That being said, it's still really competitive. I got recruited to play tennis in college. I quit as soon as I arrived, but when you go to a Division III school, your college experience is more important than anything else. So you're not going to be in a situation where you're playing your sport constantly, but at the same time, you're not usually going to be getting an athletic scholarship. Differences between the University of Chicago and Claremont McKenna. University of Chicago is an urban university. Claremont McKenna is a small liberal arts college in the LA area. Much bigger student body at the University of Chicago, and it also has graduate students, so that might be a factor. And Claremont McKenna is only for undergraduate students. Another nuance here is one of the most respected programs at the University of Chicago is their economics program, but it's really competitive and super hard. So if a student is really not sure yet, sometimes listing that major or sticking with that major can make for a pretty, intense 4-year experience. So I also think there's a slightly different vibe, not only because one is a small liberal arts college, one is a bigger university, one is on the West Coast, one is in Chicago, but the student vibe and the culture is going to be a little bit different. I would say that my happiest students at the University of Chicago tend to be highly intellectual, very interested in their education. Not to say that students at Claremont McKenna aren't, but I think the students at Claremont McKenna want that true college experience, the social, the athletic, the academic and intellectual, a little bit more of a balance. My daughter is taking Spanish 4 through Language Bird, great, but won't have a first semester grade by the ED deadline. Is it, just trying to click on, there we go. Is it okay to submit an in-progress transcript, and where would I input that information? Okay, a couple things. Awesome that you found Language Bird. There are all these online accredited high schools that are offering AP classes or advanced classes or any classes that maybe you're not able to take at your high school because of a scheduling conflict, because they don't have a teacher to teach it. So Language Bird is going to be a more expensive option, and there are others out there like UC Scout and Stanford Online and CTY, Johns Hopkins. There are a lot of them, but it's great to look into them if you're having trouble taking a class at your high school. Some things to keep in mind if you're applying early decision or early action. There is a small minority of colleges with early decision or early action that require first quarter grades of your senior year before they make a decision on your application. It's a short list, but you want to find out if that college that you're applying early to requires it. If they are required, you're going to have to get your counselor involved, and your counselor can submit first quarter grades directly to the college. A lot of times they can do it electronically. Common App has a additional form. I want to say it's called the optional report for a counselor. It's escaping me if that's what it is. Your counselor can attach your first quarter grades on that form, or they can just submit it electronically. If you're taking a class like Spanish 4 through Language Bird, it can get a little bit more complicated because a lot of times you might not have first quarter grades. So in progress grades would be really helpful. I would say you have one of two options. You can have the teacher at Language Bird tell your counselor or provide your in-progress grade via email to your counselor, and your counselor can include that on the first quarter grades that they submit for the college. Or it might be possible for your teacher at Language Bird to provide an in-progress grade directly to the colleges. And I should mention that if you're applying regular decision, a lot of the more selective colleges are going to require that you submit first semester grades. Again, your counselor is usually able to do that for you. Okay. On the Common App, do we list the state virtual school as a second high school, or being on the transcript is enough? So if you are taking those outside high school classes and they are appearing on your transcript, that's an ideal situation, but I would still list that virtual high school that you might be taking one or two classes from still in the education section. You first list your home high school, the high school that you are attending right now, and then there is a section, there is a tab in the education section for other secondary or high schools, and that's where you would list that second high school. How important is having your best ACT score in one sitting versus super score? Really good question. It's interesting because I would say the majority of colleges will super score both the SAT and the ACT. Interestingly though, there are fewer universities, usually public universities, that will super score the ACT. So in that case, your highest composite score in one sitting is what you would be submitting to those institutions. Like Penn State University, for example, does not super score the ACT, so it would be your highest score in one sitting. A lot of the private colleges and universities at this point, though, are super scoring the ACT. And colleges that super score the ACT or super score the SAT, they don't care if it happened on multiple dates. They just want the highest score they can get from the student. So many questions, wow. For an optional essay, I know to do it. Yes, you know from AN, yes. What sort of options could we write about that are not already on the activities list? The prompt is, what else, if anything, would you wish the admissions committee to know about your candidacy? Yeah, this is a tough one. So a couple things just to unpack. If you're not in Application Nation, you may not know about these optional essays. What do you do about them? For the most part, they're not optional. I want students to do them, and to be honest, if you want to be competitive for the college, almost always you should be doing them. There are going to be some exceptions, like an optional essay prompt like, has anything impacted your academic record? And if so, can you provide some information? For some students who've done well all throughout high school, they wouldn't have to answer that, but almost all the optional essay prompts, supplemental essay prompts, should be done. For this question, I think I would go back to the student soundbite. Look at the student soundbite, and if you're not familiar with soundbite, I know you are, Tanja, but if you're not familiar with soundbite, I wrote a book about it. It's part of my entire approach. It is an identity. It is a statement about the student. And you're supposed to use nouns and verbs instead of adjectives and adverbs in it. So pull out a noun or a verb in your soundbite, and almost always it'll give you an idea to write for this particular prompt. Maybe one more question. Is a 1570 good for the Ivies? Oh yeah, that's really good. Yeah. I would say if you're in the 1500 or higher, that's going to be really strong for all those highly selected colleges. Obviously, if you have higher than that, like a 1520 or higher, it puts you in an even better position from a testing standpoint, but a 1570 is going to be really, really strong. Is it a good idea to apply for multicultural tours for students? University of Rochester invited my child. Yeah, it's interesting. Even though affirmative action has ended and race is not going to be a factor in the admissions process, what I'm seeing already is that a lot of selective institutions like the University of Rochester are still having fly-in programs for students coming from underrepresented backgrounds, and some special programming. But the truth of the matter is, when a student applies, admissions officers will no longer be seeing those race checkboxes that are on the application. You will still see them on the common application and most applications. That's for tracking and demographic purposes, but the admissions officers reading the student's application would not have access to those racial checkboxes. I wrote a lot about this topic specifically back in June when affirmative action ended, but I will just say that if your background is really important to you, you want to make sure that comes through in other parts of the application, like your main essay, a supplemental essay, or possibly in your activities list or your honors list. One last question. Hi, what are your thoughts on keeping 3 varsity sports if you're not a recruited athlete? You know, I feel like things have changed so much in, athletics and youth. I think if there are any parents listening in, our childhood was very different. It was very common to see 3-sport athletes. So a student who would do a different sport in the fall, winter, and spring at their high school. Now I think that's a little bit more unusual because there's this whole focus on getting recruited or specialization, and students who want to get recruited ultimately probably have to be on their high school team and a separate competitive club team. And when they do that, it limits their ability to play 3 sports. If you're not getting recruited, it doesn't mean you should stop playing your sports. If you love all 3 of them, go for it. And I would say the students who do 3 sports for all 4 years, it's really impressive. And if you're able to be a captain of your team for one of those sports, even better. All right, so it's after 10 o'clock here on the East Coast. I gotta put my 10-year-old to bed. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope she's asleep already, by the way. I haven't done this in a while. I really missed you all, and I can't wait to be back here again and be able to answer your questions. I got through a lot, but I'm sure you have more. So obviously, if you like the style, come back again for a Facebook Live or an Instagram Live. I do weekly blogs every single week. I have tons of free resources, but obviously if you want more support from me in the admissions process, consider joining Application Nation. For the younger group, it's for the class of 2025, 2026, and 2027, and a surprise coming this weekend, so stay tuned. I hope you all have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you back here again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.